just whilst they are accepting it, let me just pull up some of the questions. So quite a lot of questions for Morella, so I'll just hold on to those. Harry, there was a question around the Real Junk Food Project pay-as-you-feel cafes and supermarkets, and whether you're aware of those, come across those guys before.
Yeah, so we started a community fridge probably almost 2 years ago now. And the Real Junk Food Project were one of the first that we started working through when we were doing community fridge. We still work with them to a very limited extent. Our main food suppliers, though, at the moment are Fair Share, as well as the supermarkets. So we work with Lidl and Aldi, which is all through Neighbourly as well. We work with Tesco's and Asda, but also some of the other local food companies. So being in Cornwall, there's obviously a lot of pasty companies. So yeah, we work with
You get to redistribute pasties?
We take all their wonkies, so anything that's got a hole in it or come out of funny shape, we take all of them frozen, so they go out with the food parcels. And also then companies like Total Produce, so we get their towards the use by date fruit and veg off them as well. But yeah, we work with a lot of different companies, including the supermarkets, as well as local food factories and things like that. Was there another element to that question?
No, it was fairly straightforward. So I think the others are struggling to get in. Let me just try and ask them again. In the meantime, can I ask you, like, all of you have achieved an awful lot of things, and I imagine on that journey you'll have had many setbacks, a little like where we are at the moment. People, COVID is a huge setback for everyone. My question to you both is how do you stay motivated and on track despite these setbacks? How do you keep on going? And it looks like, yeah. Do you want to take that one first, Franny?
Yes. I mean, personally, I've never had any problem with motivation. I think because, as the crisis, increases, as the iceberg rushes ever faster towards us, and I fear ever more that my children will not be able to live because there will be no habitable planet, along with all the other children. I have no problem, no lack of motivation fighting that, and dedicating my whole working life to trying to do whatever I can to prevent the end of human life. I mean, I feel it
certainly focuses the mind.
Say that again.
It certainly focuses the mind.
It does, but I mean, that's on the big scale. But on the little scale, all the little wins all the way along. When you plant the tree, that's a fantastic little win. Or when you set up a community event and you hope that 5 people will come and 70 people come, that's a great win. And all the new friends you make, and my kids are now totally into tree planting, and they're more knowledgeable than I am, and that's fantastic to see. So there's so many wins along the way, and so many positives. I mean, if I was sitting on my ass doing nothing, just doom scrolling and panicking about what's going to happen, and how the future will, that would be much more difficult to cope with, I think, personally. I mean, I'm very much of the Greta school of thought, where she says hope comes from action. You can't just sit there going, is there any hope? You start doing things, and then you realize, oh yes, there's hope. And if 6 billion people on the planet all start doing things, then we'd turn the problem around very quickly. So yeah.
Well, that's a very positive response, and I think it's some people, it can go two ways, can't it? Get overwhelmed with the size of the task of tackling climate change and all the things that come across it. But as you say, actually, it's by doing little actions can help you keep focused and keep you going. Harry and Morella, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts to add?
For me, I think it's probably much the same. I think we, as a group that are here today, all doing this because we see there's not really any alternative. It has to be done. and we're probably the best people to do it. So yeah, I think it's much the same answer in the fact that motivation kind of comes naturally with this kind of field of work. You're only in it because you want to see that difference and you want to make some kind of change. And there is that, yeah, absolutely. They kind of worry of, well, what's to come if we weren't to do this, then how long can we actually sustain humanity? So yeah, I'd say my answer is pretty much the same. But for us, it's been about just all of those little things. So we nominate ourselves for awards because it's a great evening out, and it just gives you that chance to reward yourself. And just celebrating those small wins, I think, is also really important.
Thank you. So it's all about the small wins. Mirella, do you have anything to add, or will I delve into some of the million questions around setting up a share shed?
Yes, that it's very important also to be connected to positivity, not in a fluffy way. But I think there's in a world there's so much drama and wrong things, going on, like appalling things. There's also quite a lot of amazing stuff in something like these events, something like reading positive news magazine, and connecting with people that truly inspire you and you admire. There's just feeding that. It's also regularly for me. It's very helpful.
Yeah, excellent. And I think actually that's also a really good point about surrounding yourself with positive people, like the people in this group. So thank you for that. Now, Mirella, the top question that I've been asked here is whether the share shed, will the share shed become financially independent of grants? Is there enough income to support itself?
That's a dream of ours. We're hopeful. We are not there yet. 3 years in, we're not. I would say we're 50% there, which is not bad. It's not ideal either, and that's at the moment our big question marks. The potential for us to expand is really great, and by expanding, we incur more costs and we also generate more income. So it's that dance that we have to figure out what's the best balance for ourselves. At the moment, yesterday I just put a bid in to, extend our services to larger towns, and I hope that will help make the project more resilient in the long term. But I wouldn't be able to give an honest answer right now to say by this date, we'll be able to be financially sustainable, because it's a big unknown.
Yeah.
And hence why we're trying to complement, sorry, to just finish off, just also complement the services around repair, when we do repairs and we do skill shares, which hopefully once COVID restrictions, are not so great, and the risks around it not so great, it means that as well as supporting our ethos even further, it will also generate more income. So we're trying to be creative around ways of making the whole thing more sustainable, really.
Fantastic. And I think being innovative around funding is probably something, Harry, you have tapped into quite a few different pots, haven't you, as well as Franny doing the crowdfunding. Do you have any advice for the groups in terms of broader funding applications?
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of our library things out at Bugle. That's funded through the parish council. Someone did mention something about which parish council has got a wind farm. I think it's Tower Drift parish council, of memory, is the one that we got it from. But yeah, I think again, it's just taking that broad approach, and like I was saying earlier, it's thinking about ways you can diversify income beyond the obvious streams. So while funding is important, we've also looked at how we can do things like corporate hire, and things for like corporate events and event hire and things like that. So actually, within the kind of library of things concept, what other users could you have that actually can afford to pay that higher price, which then subsidizes the cost of everyone else? So that was a kind of another area that we've looked at as well, is using those kind of corporate hires as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a question. Working with corporates can be quite difficult from community groups. I mean, a lot of community groups tend to it's easy to see the corporates as the devil, but actually they can have deep pockets, and working with them can be very effective, can't it? And that's something we want to help our groups with more, to look at how we can do that as well as a network.
Yeah, for me, when I done a talk at Seed Festival last year, and one of the questions that was put to me was essentially along those same lines of, actually, a lot of people are quite scared of corporates, and we've all got this kind of detachment from them because we see them as the creators of the problem that we're there to try and solve. And ultimately, I think we need to go down a complete systematic change at every kind of level. So the space of these businesses in the future could be very different to what we kind of see them as now. But for me, it's very much as well about starting that conversation, because we're in this consumerism kind of culture at the moment, and it's not going to change overnight. So we have to start somewhere. So our thought process really is along the lines of, let's start that conversation and start with some really small changes, and then we can slowly kind of push them further out of their comfort zones and create that kind of bigger, more systematic change. But you've got to start somewhere, and yeah, those kinds of relationships I think is the best way to start it, whether it's just something small. For us, quite often with the textiles, we just suggest something like making bags out of the waste initially. This is something that's quite comfortable. But then longer term, you can then look at suggesting, well, they completely overhaul the way they're designing a product or what materials are being used in that product. So we can look at kind of how we can extend the life cycle and also actually design within a more circular economy. So yeah, it's taking those kinds of small steps towards something bigger in the end.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Claire, do you have anything that you want to add on that? Because you work with corporates too, to add to Harry's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you've said all really, haven't you? I mean, I think it's very easy to preach to the converted, isn't it? And to get volunteers doing stuff when they already want to. The real challenge is working with the people that need to make those changes. And more often than not, they are the big corporates that don't want to think about being more environmentally conscious, or being sort of, I guess, having to put their money where their mouth is, really. But real change isn't going to happen unless we can make those changes in those businesses, because they're the ones that can make massive changes. So I think don't be scared of corporates, and I think don't be afraid to use their money. You know, they've got the money, you can charge them some money for them to do something, and then you can channel that money into community action that needs a bit of funding. So I think embrace the corporates, and you'll find everything a bit easier.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Now, one of the questions here is targeted, is for you, Marilla, about the share shed, but actually I think it relates to all of the activities of all the groups. So one of the questions is whether you have encountered any issues about sharing things from the share shed because of COVID. Now, that applies probably to the, musical instruments, bags for beach clean, Franny, things to do with tree planting. So have any of you encountered any challenges around that? And perhaps what you might have done about it without going into a detailed risk assessment?
Yeah, we've definitely reviewed our risk assessment and up our game around cleaning and sanitizing items, for sure, and had to, adapt how things work. So in order to keep physical distancing and all that joyful stuff, So, but nothing major. We have decided, we have chosen to close now for this month, when we had the option to continue on a click and collect basis, because I felt our team of volunteers, especially, are mainly elderly people, and I just felt, especially here in Totnes, the cases were positive. The cases are still unfortunately growing up quite a bit. So I just felt, in our case, it was just like, I prefer to close when we actually have the option to, with furlough leave still available to support the project. Our volunteers are not exposed to that risk, because like or not, there's still a risk, as minimal, as responsible as we would be. There's still a certain kind of risk. And in the meantime, that's also an opportunity to focus on fundraising. So this is what we're doing. That's a choice we made. Whilst I know a lot of projects have continued operating, it's just a matter of, choice.
Okay, thanks. Has anybody else got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think for us, we've done the extra COVID risk assessments, etc. We've closed shops, we've furloughed staff. So it has, put a lot of kind of restrictions in place. But from the Library of Things perspective and the music library, we've carried them on through click and collect and delivery. We've also extended the kind of period from when we would receive an item back to when we'd rent it out. So everything now, when is returned, is quarantined for 3 days before we touch it. We then go in and clean it, and before it will go out on repair. So yeah, cleaning processes and stuff like that have been picked up as well. But yeah, in brief, we're trying as much as we can. But obviously it's a bit slower with having to have these extra quarantine periods and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, but it's good to hear that lots of activity is still going on. And Morella as well, you have been active. In fact, didn't you have double the amount of borrows through the summer period since you launched the mobile Library of Things than you would have had under normal terms? So that feels quite inspiring. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, how about now?
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when the second one was announced, we decided to open as a one-off, kind of the day before, on the 4th of November, right? And we had 53 things board in a matter of 3 hours window. When in average we have 70 to 80 things board a month. So it also lighted, and it was also a kind of, borrow for 4 weeks, pay for one kind of things. So that was a way to generate a bit of income for this month, but also to support a lot of people, to get on with some DIY projects. Some people bought guitars to have a go with, and it's really also, a pleasant surprise, I guess, to see still people valuing a lot and making the most of the service.
Fantastic. And
I don't want to be the downer, but the tree team has pretty much stopped this today. We had I think it was 25 students from the high school. We were going to be planting 200 trees at the high school today, and second lockdown has put a complete stop to our planting.
Do you think you'll be able to, once we're out of lockdown, do you think that you'll be able to get going again? Or
yeah, we had it in place before lockdown for the high school with the COVID protocols in place, and with I think just 6 volunteers from our end. But then, so after lockdown we'll be back.
Fantastic. Claire, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I very briefly mentioned that our litter picking stations, they've really come into their own over the lockdown and coronavirus, because it is socially distanced. It's an activity that you do on your own, on your daily exercise, which is maybe at a beach or a beauty spot where there is a litter picking station. So we obviously had the issue of people borrowing the equipment between uses, but we've created this sanitizer unit that now is fixed on them. We've only rolled that out through Devon and Cornwall to start with, because we got a bit of grant funding which allowed us to be able to do that, which was great. but it now just means that the stations can be out and used safely. So that's the main thing. It took us a long time to find a sanitizer that doesn't contain microplastics, because for you that don't realize, almost every single hand sanitizer contains a microplastic that you're obviously rubbing onto your hands, and it's being absorbed into your blood, and that's plastic, and that's not okay. So we spent a long time researching that, but finally found a good one.
Well, perhaps you'd like to share that one afterwards, Claire.
Yeah, definitely. It's a company called Proverb. Find them online. They're great.
Okay, thanks. And there's lots in the chat just pointing out how pivotal a lot of the older residents are within the community. So, and I know for a fact that while some have battened down the hatches, some of them are determined to get out of there. I think Andrea points out the fabulous group of older residents in Brixham called Pride in Brixham, who make the town centre and harbour absolutely beautiful with their gardening skills. And she has a plan to join them when retired. That sounds like a great retirement plan. Now, let me just, another question and comment to you all is with regard to volunteers. Let me just find that question, and whether you have any tips for bringing more volunteers on board. And actually, I think another one just got voted up, which is related to that, which is about bringing more difficult community members on board with something. So it's two questions there. Let's start with the first one. Tips for recruiting more volunteers. Who would like to start? Franny, how about you?
Bring cake.
Bring cake.
we always had free cake at our tree planting. And make it very clear that everybody is welcome on all the your flyers or your emails or whatever you're writing to encourage people. Just make it clear that everybody's welcome, and no experience necessary if that's the case. Cake is available. Bring your friends. Nobody too old, nobody too young, all that kind of thing. Just just be welcoming. Basically, that would be my top tip.
Yeah, fantastic. Cake does work, says Kate Yo. Harry, any thoughts beyond cake?
Cake definitely works.
Yeah, for us, cake works as well.
It's all about the cake.
Yeah, we always make sure we've got some kind of cake and refreshments available for the volunteers. We'll pay for their lunch and things like that as well. But no, for us, I think one of the things that we've learned is to be quite specific. If you've got if you want to volunteer for something specific, be very specific. So actually go out and say you want someone for a certain amount, what those hours are that you want them for, and exactly kind of what they'll be doing, and break it then down into small little volunteer roles. And through putting those kinds of things on social media, we found for us that's been a more effective way by kind of breaking it down to bite-sized pieces. So then they're then aware of what they're signing up for, but they also know that they're not signing up for too much. So for us, yeah, that's probably been the key way of building up our volunteers. Social media as well for us has been the main kind of route for attracting volunteers as well. Most of them come through our Facebook.
Excellent. Mirella, do you want to add anything to that?
I echo what has been said, and I just wanted to say from our experience at the Share Shed, a lot of our volunteers came out from the very initial survey we were doing to begin with in Totnes, asking people if they would be interested in having library things in this community. If so, what kind of things they would like to borrow, that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, just would you be interested in helping out this initiative? And I would say more than 50% of our volunteers came out from that first, I guess. So that's which surprises me today, because it's almost 3.5 years now.
Fantastic. So we've got cake, being approachable, being very specific, using your social channels, and asking the community what they want through surveys, which are all great top tips. Anything to add to the list, Claire? I don't want to miss you off.
Yeah, I would add one that's kind of it's a two-part that is coming together. take advantage of that volunteer, not to the extreme, but there's nothing worse than someone saying, oh, I'd like to get involved, and then you never calling on them for help, because it takes quite a lot of guts for someone to put themselves forward for something. So even if you get overwhelmed with offers for help, use those people, make them feel like they're important. And that's sort of what it leads to, is really making your volunteers feel like they are an integral part, giving them that kind of ownership and appreciation, because it's very easy, especially if you're the sort of organization that maybe has 100 volunteers across the year and they all just do half an hour here or there. It's fostering that community of them, and really making them feel like their contribution is vital and really appreciated. And just, again, like you say, kill them with kindness. You know, you need your volunteers to do what you want to do, so make them know that you need them and appreciate them, and definitely try not to overlook anyone, because that's the worst. I know from my experience, I volunteered to help with a group, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, sent in an email, said I'd love to help out, and they said great, thanks, we'll be in touch, and I never heard from them again, and it left a really awful feeling. And I was like, I don't want to offer again, you know. And a year later they put out another shout saying, oh, we're looking for volunteers, and I was like, well, you don't deserve my time because you didn't get back to me, you know. So I think that's really important as well.
I would add to that it's very important to follow up afterwards with just a straightforward thank you, so that they appreciate them afterwards. And also in the era of social media, you know, lots of photos, obviously you have to ask people's permission before taking the photos of them, but everybody loves, well, most people love to be you know, included in the pictures. That's me there, and you know, there's me, you know. It's just basic human affirmation, isn't it, that if you've done something good, you know, you appreciate being thanked for it and appreciated. So it's basic.
Yeah,
it's very important.
For me, it's kind of as well, it's on that kind of line, not just thinking of your volunteers almost as employees. So in the same way that you offer opportunities to your employees and your staff, you should do the same for your volunteers. So if you're paying for a food hygiene certificate training or something like that, it should be open up to your volunteers too. And just about creating those opportunities for kind of personal development and progression. And actually, a lot of our employees started as volunteers, so they've kind of progressed from taking on a volunteer role to now they're working with us.
Fantastic. I think, and Claire adds to that as well, Harry, and just saying that she thinks, it's Claire from our CAG Devon team, that is, to be clear, that it's also good to have one member of your team, of your core team, allocated to keeping in touch with volunteers and responding to inquiries. So I guess it's about giving your volunteers a specific role again, which comes back to what Harry pointed out before. So fantastic, everybody. I just think there is a lot of love for you speakers and all the advice that you guys have given. I think we're coming to our time. We are going to do breakout groups after a little pause, or I'm not going to pause the broadcasting, but I think people can pop a cup of tea. But do you guys have one last thing that you want people to kind of like reflect on at the end after this, before we pause for a break? I'll go clockwise. Franny's first.
Well, I've been working in climate change for like 15 years or something like that, and in all that time, everybody who I've met who works on climate change, either voluntary or paid, is happier than everybody I know who doesn't work on climate change. and I've got a pop psychology theory for why this is. It's only pop psychology, but I think that, you know, everybody knows that there's this catastrophe coming towards us as a species, and those people who are ignoring it and going on as though life is normal, they've got these psychological monsters, you know, coming towards them. Whereas people who've turned to it and facing it and going, that is the problem, and I'm going to put my effort in towards tackling that problem, psychologically is a better, healthier state to be in, and you end up happier.
Fantastic. I think that is a great theory. Harry, over to you.
For me, I think the thing that I'd say to take away and think about is, how can you give away what you have? So for me, it was something that I kind of wasn't sure about and hasn't really hit me initially until we were really thinking about it. And I think by that point, when you looked at the science, they were saying it was about 11 years that we've got left to make this systematic change. Ultimately, like, I've got a reasonable sized team now, like 14 staff, but equally we're still quite small on the scale of actually what needs to change. There's no way that myself and our team, and even those that we kind of partner and collaborate with, if we all work together, there's no way we could achieve that change at a level that is enough for us to get out of this nightmare situation that we found ourselves in. So actually, for me, it was that kind of realization of it's not about doing as much as we can. It's about building these kind of ideas and these models into things that you can then give to other people. So actually, how can you give away the concept of text so actually other people can replicate it in their communities? Because we're only going to be able to create the change at the level we need if we all are able to do it. So how can we kind of replicate our work and give it away? So for me, if there was one thing to go away with and think about after this, it's the ideas and activities and actions you're working on. How do you scale them, and how do you give them away and support others to do it in their community as well?
Fantastic. I think we can all think about what can we give away. And Franny, I think that's a really important point about facing it, and because it's a bit scary, isn't it? But ultimately, we all feel better by actually doing something. So there's a lot of appreciation of that. Morella.
Putting
You on the spot. Tricky.
Yeah, a few things on my mind. One is that as we approach Black Friday, there's also, that question, why buy when borrow? So like to encourage people to reflect on it. There are some things that does make sense for us to have, and they will be used and it will serve us and our well-being and all that. And there's a lot of stuff that's not, for which is not the case. So just wanted to put that reflection in people's minds and hearts. And also, what can you share? What are your strengths? And in what can you share from that?
Thank you. What can you share, folks? And lastly, but not leastly, Claire.
I think the thing to take away from this is that small acts do make a big difference, and you've got to celebrate those little wins. And volunteer burnout is real, and at points you are going to really struggle. And I know, you're constantly thinking, what more should I have done? I could have done this, or I still got to send that email. I must reply to this. I need to go and plant these trees. I need to go pick up that piece of rope. All of these hundreds of things are going around in your head, and it's really easy to be overwhelmed, and it's very easy to forget all of the brilliant things that you've already done. And it's very easy to focus on there's so much more to do. I've still got to do this. I haven't done enough. But every single thing that you've done towards taking a step towards a better future is an absolutely huge win. And you've got to remember that. It's kind of like stop and smell the roses every so often kind of thing, you're running a community group. Maybe you've recruited another volunteer. Maybe you've just held a brilliant event, whatever it might be. It's important to remember that those acts are so beneficial and not to be overwhelmed by how much more there is to do.
Wow. So we've got celebrate the wins, no matter how small, by facing them, and it's going to make you happy and positive. Think about what you can share and what you can give away. And I think that's a pretty good roundup of thoughts for the day. So thank you, everybody, to our speakers. Virtual clap from everybody in the chat, but that is really, really fantastic.